When a sigma male collapses, no one sees it. There is no dramatic breakdown, no confession, no visible fall from grace. The collapse happens inside him, quietly, privately, with a precision that looks like calm from the outside. People around him think he's simply withdrawing, losing interest, or becoming distant, but they have no idea that something far deeper is happening beneath the surface. Because the sigma does not fall apart in public. He disassembles himself internally, piece by piece, removing everything that no longer aligns with who he is becoming. And long before anyone realizes he has hit his lowest point, he's already begun rebuilding, silently, fiercely, and with a clarity that only comes after the kind of internal storm most people never survive. This cycle of collapse and rebirth is his hidden engine. It breaks him, strengthens him, sharpens him, and evolves him. And he repeats it throughout his life without ever calling it by name. If you're ready to understand this cycle in depth, stay with Silent Wise. This is where we decode the psychology of the unseen transformation. Which phase of the cycle do you resonate with most? Comment one word below to mark your place in the story, and subscribe for the next breakdown. His collapse begins internally long before anything shows on the outside. It always starts in the quiet places no one sees, long before a word is spoken, long before anyone suspects the shift. For a sigma male, collapse is never loud. It isn't an explosion, it isn't chaos, and it isn't visible to the people around him. It begins as a subtle internal fracture. A moment when something inside him realizes the path he's walking no longer aligns with the person he is becoming. At first, he tries to ignore it, pushing through with discipline, logic, and the strength everyone assumes he always has. But the mind begins to rebel. The intuition that guides him starts whispering, pulling him toward uncomfortable truths. He notices that his thoughts drift away from the present and toward silent questions he has avoided for too long. His energy becomes heavier, his emotional bandwidth thinner, his patience shorter, but only on the inside. Outwardly, he appears the same: calm, composed, unreadable. No cracks show, no signals leak. Yet internally, something major is shifting. This phase is invisible to everyone, but unmistakable to him. He begins to feel a quiet exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical tiredness. It is the exhaustion of carrying a life, a relationship, or an identity that has reached its expiration point. He becomes hyper-aware of small inconsistencies in his environment, sensing misalignments that once hid beneath routine. His intuition sharpens, almost painfully, and it starts pointing to the truth he doesn't want to accept. He has outgrown something, or something has outgrown him. Before collapse becomes visible, his inner world begins dismantling itself with precision. He stops emotionally attaching to the things that once mattered, not out of coldness, but because his mind is clearing the space for what comes next. The collapse you see later, the withdrawal, the silence, the disappearance, is only the final echo of the transformation that started long before. Inside him, the old version is already dying, quietly making room for the rebirth he doesn't yet know he's preparing for. He removes emotional weight piece by piece, dismantling the version of himself that can no longer continue. When a sigma male enters this phase, the world believes he is simply becoming quieter, more distant, or more selective. But what's really happening is far more intricate and internal. He begins peeling away layers of emotional weight that he has carried for months or years without acknowledgement. This isn't dramatic or chaotic. It's methodical, almost surgical. He looks at every attachment, every responsibility, every expectation placed upon him, and asks a question he rarely voices. Does this still serve the person I am becoming? And anything that fails that test begins to dissolve. He detaches not with bitterness, but with clarity. Clarity so sharp it feels like a rebirth in slow motion. He stops responding to emotional demands that once dictated his behavior. He reclaims mental bandwidth that was drained by dynamics he tolerated far too long. The people around him often mistake this shift for indifference, but it is the opposite. It is a profound act of self-preservation. He withdraws his emotional resources from situations that feed on his strength but never replenish it. He stops carrying the burdens of others, not because he suddenly stopped caring, but because he realizes those burdens are preventing his own evolution. Piece by piece, he strips away outdated identities. The version of himself who tried too hard, who explained too much, who stayed too long. This dismantling is not a collapse. It is a controlled demolition. He knows that to rebuild, he must clear the foundation first. So he allows old narratives to fall away. He stops seeking validation. He stops forcing connections. He stops pretending everything is fine. And quietly, with a resolve that no one understands until it's too late, he lets the old self die. What remains is not emptiness, but space, wide, open, and necessary for the transformation that's coming. Each piece of emotional weight removed brings him closer to the next version of himself, the one he's unknowingly been preparing to become. He enters isolation to face truths he has avoided, allowing the old identity to fall apart. When this phase begins, it looks like disappearing from the outside. Fewer messages, fewer responses, fewer traces of his presence. But internally, it is the most intense chapter of his cycle. The Sigma male doesn't retreat to escape the world. He retreats to confront the parts of himself he can no longer outrun. Isolation becomes a mirror, one that reflects the truths he has postponed, minimized, or buried beneath responsibilities and emotional noise. In this solitude, distractions fall away, and what remains is raw, honest self-awareness. He examines every decision, every wound, every pattern he keeps repeating, and he does it without flinching. This is where the old identity begins to crack, not because he forces it to, but because it can no longer withstand the weight of unspoken truths. With no audience to perform for and no expectations to uphold, he finally admits where he's been stagnant, where he's been wounded, and where he has been living on autopilot. He acknowledges the habits that kept him small, the compromises that drained him, and the fears he hid behind independence. The world cannot imagine the intensity of these internal confrontations because he carries them with the same silence he carries everything else. But inside, a storm is dismantling the facade he built for survival. And he lets it. He allows himself to unravel because he knows that growth demands a collapse before reconstruction. In isolation, he stops resisting the truths he once labeled as uncomfortable or inconvenient. He lets them dissolve the version of himself that became too heavy to carry forward. This falling apart is not weakness. It is release. It is liberation from patterns he never chose consciously. It is the shedding of identities shaped by old wounds, old expectations, and old environments. By the time he emerges, the old self is gone, not through destruction, but through transformation. Isolation was the furnace, and the man who walks out is not the man who walked in. He rewires his mindset during the quiet phase, replacing weakness with discipline and clarity. In this stretch of deep silence, something fundamental begins to shift inside him. The Sigma male does not rebuild himself through noise, attention, or external motivation. He does it in the unseen spaces where no one applauds and no one notices the work. This quiet phase becomes his laboratory, a place where he strips his mind down to its foundations and examines the flaws, vulnerabilities, and outdated beliefs that once dictated his behavior. What others see as isolation is actually reconstruction. He identifies the patterns that weakened him, the emotional blind spots that slowed his growth, and the mental habits that drained more energy than they gave. And in the stillness, he begins rewiring himself with a precision that looks effortless from the outside, but requires absolute honesty from within. This is where his discipline is reborn. He replaces emotional reactivity with emotional intelligence. He replaces overthinking with intentional thinking. He replaces self-doubt with internal proof, not from validation, but from witnessing his own resilience in silence. Every realization becomes a brick in the new structure of his identity. Every moment of discomfort becomes fuel for the next stage of his transformation. He often looks calm, detached, or unreadable during this period because his focus has turned inward, crafting a mindset built for the next version of himself. The clarity that emerges from this phase is not loud. It doesn't announce itself or demand recognition. It settles into him gradually, like dawn light filling a dark room. He starts to see what aligns and what drains, what deserves his energy and what no longer has a place in his life. Weakness is not something he hides from anymore. It becomes something he upgrades. His inner wiring shifts from survival mode to strategic mode, giving him a mental sharpness that others notice only after he returns with a different presence, calmer, clearer, and unmistakably stronger. By the time he steps back into the world, the man he used to be no longer exists. His silence forged a new operating system, one built on discipline, clarity, and an unshakable sense of direction. He rebuilds from zero, constructing a stronger, sharper identity with intention. When the Sigma male reaches the point of collapse, he does something most people fear. He lets the old version of himself die completely. Not partially, not slowly, completely. He understands that rebuilding while holding on to outdated habits, fragile beliefs, or emotional debris only recreates the same weaknesses he's trying to escape. So he wipes the slate clean. This from zero phase is not a setback for him, it is a strategic reset. He stands in the rubble of who he used to be and begins choosing, piece by piece, what deserves to return and what must be permanently left behind. This reconstruction isn't emotional impulse, it's architecture. Every choice is deliberate. He doesn't just want to feel better, he wants to become unbreakable. He redesigns his identity with the precision of someone who knows his past version was never meant to carry him forward. His values sharpen. His boundaries harden. His sense of self becomes grounded in internal truth rather than external influence. He rebuilds his routines, redefines his priorities, and reconstructs his inner world so that nothing rests on unstable foundations again. People often mistake his silence for emptiness during this stage, but the truth is he is full of blueprints, visions, and the quiet fire of someone becoming new. His emotional landscape changes too. The insecurities he once tolerated are replaced with standards. The attachments that once drained him are replaced with purpose. He learns to trust his intuition more deeply because it's the only voice that stayed with him through every collapse. By rebuilding from zero, he eliminates the noise of expectations and returns to the raw, unfiltered core of who he is meant to become. And this time, he constructs himself not around survival or acceptance, but around intention, strength, and clarity. When he emerges, people rarely recognize him. Not because he hides, but because he has outgrown every version of himself they once knew. His identity is no longer a reaction to life. It is a deliberate creation. And that is what makes him unshakable. He returns with new boundaries, new purpose, and a new emotional architecture. When the Sigma male reemerges after a collapse and rebuild cycle, he is not simply back. He's rebuilt from blueprint to foundation, returning with a structure inside him that no longer bends for convenience or breaks under pressure. His boundaries come first, sharp, defined, and non-negotiable. These boundaries aren't walls meant to keep the world out. They're filters designed to let only the right energy in. He no longer entertains people who drain him, environments that shrink him, or dynamics that distort his identity. What once slipped through cracks now hits solid stone. His return also carries purpose, precise, distilled, and unshakably internal. Before the collapse, he moved with fragments of direction influenced by expectations, obligations, or emotional noise. Afterward, he moves like someone who has met himself in the quiet and decided exactly who he intends to become. His goals sharpen. His decisions speed up. His tolerance for distractions collapses. Every step he takes is aligned with a personal mission that no one else fully understands, because it wasn't built for the world, it was built for him. But the most transformative part of his return is his new emotional architecture. What used to overwhelm him now informs him. What once silenced him now strengthens him. He doesn't numb his emotions, he organizes them. He doesn't suppress his sensitivity, he gives it structure. He becomes both softer on the inside and harder on the outside, a paradox only he can carry with ease. Emotional storms no longer scatter him. They pass through a system he rebuilt to process, protect, and propel. People around him often sense the difference before they understand it. His presence feels clearer. His silence feels heavier. His decisions feel final. He no longer reacts, he responds, and his responses are shaped by a deeper alignment that didn't exist before the collapse. This evolved version of him is harder to manipulate, impossible to distract, and immune to the emotional traps that once tangled him. He returns not as a repaired version of his old self, but as a redesigned one, stronger, leaner, and unmistakably intentional. He emerges transformed, unrecognizable even to himself, until the next cycle begins. When the Sigma male rises from the ashes of his internal collapse, he steps back into the world with a presence that feels foreign even to the man he was weeks or months before. He looks in the mirror and sees the same face, but the eyes staring back at him no longer carry the same stories, attachments, or illusions. He becomes a stranger to his old patterns, the ones that once pulled him into emotional loops, drained his energy, or blurred his purpose. The transformation is not subtle, it's tectonic. His sense of self recalibrates. His ambitions realign. His tolerance for anything misaligned drops to zero. Even the way he breathes feels different, lighter, sharper, controlled. As he moves through his new life, people who once knew him feel the shift before they can name it. His silence no longer signals withdrawal, it signals ownership. His boundaries no longer feel defensive, they feel sovereign. He walks with the calm of someone who has fought a private war and returned with knowledge others will never understand. The emotional storms that once shook him now pass without leaving a mark. He doesn't react to provocations. He doesn't cling to expectations. He doesn't negotiate with anything that threatens his equilibrium. Every action is chosen. Every word is measured. Every step is aligned with the new architecture he built in the dark. But hidden beneath this transformation lies the truth he rarely admits, even to himself. The cycle is not over. It never is. His evolution comes in waves: collapse, disappearance, reconstruction, reemergence, again and again. Each time more refined, more disciplined, more self-aware. He knows that life will eventually test the very structure he just rebuilt. He knows another shift will come, another internal breaking point, another season of solitude, where the old layers will peel away and another version of himself will be forged. He doesn't fear this cycle, he respects it. Because every time he becomes unrecognizable, he becomes closer to the man he was always meant to be. When a Sigma male completes another cycle of collapse and rebirth, he doesn't announce it, explain it, or celebrate it. He simply steps into the world with a new level of clarity that speaks louder than any explanation. If you felt something in this journey, if you recognize pieces of your own transformation in these patterns, then you already know why the Sigma path is both isolating and powerful. Growth costs you versions of yourself. Evolution demands silence, distance, and discipline. But every time you rise sharper. If this resonated, subscribe to Silent Wise and step deeper into the psychology behind the quiet transformations most people never see. Tell me in the comments, which part of the cycle are you in right now? Collapse, rebuild, or reemergence?